Hi, welcome back to the third lecture in the nervous system. And I just have a calming picture here of my son when he was younger with my sister's dog. So if you're feeling a little bit stressed as you're studying this, just remember you can just come back to this picture and all your stress levels will go down. So your adrenal medulla will quit kicking out all the stress hormones. And then after a few minutes of mental clearing, you'll be ready to carry on. So, should we get started? In this portion, we are going to learn about something called the synapse. And the synapse is where one neuron meets another neuron, or one of the four types of effector cells, and those two cells are going to communicate with each other. And as you can see in the picture, they actually don't touch, okay? So there's social distancing that always goes along with the neurons, okay? So when we look first at synapses, I want to show you synapses between two neurons. So here are two neurons. The neuron that is above has the red squiggly line showing that it's sending a message towards the neuron down below. And in that black little square is the synapse, where the communication is going to happen between the two neurons. So in this case, the upper one's considered the sending neuron and the lower one's considering the receiving neuron. But of course, we have to use scientific terminology. So we would call the first one the presynaptic neuron and the second one the postsynaptic neuron, okay, because the synapse is between the two of them. Now, one neuron is not always a presynaptic, one's always a postsynaptic. For instance, if this presynaptic neuron was a sensory neuron, then the postsynaptic neuron could be an interneuron, in which case it would have to be another neuron past it, which could be another interneuron or a motor neuron, in which case the postsynaptic neuron then becomes the sending neuron or becomes a presynaptic neuron, okay? So when we are using the terms presynaptic and postsynaptic, we are not implying anything about it's the first one in the series or it's the last one in the series. All right. So when we are talking synapses, remember when I talked before about how incoming messages would go to the cell body and or the dendrites. So this is showing both a drawing as well as scanning electron microscope where I have an arrow pointing to all the axon, terminal boutons from various neurons. So as you can see, one neuron is getting a plethora of incoming messages. So there are literally on this picture, there's probably 30 or 40 synaptic places happening. And these messages could be excitatory or inhibitory. If it's attached to if it's getting messages from temperature sensory receptors, it could have 85 messages for hot and 15 messages for cold, in which case it goes, oh, the hots win. We're gonna send out a message that we are warm, okay? So the neuron has to make sense of all the incoming messages. Now, lovely as this picture is, oh, and what structural type of neuron is this that's being drawn? That's right, that's a multipolar neuron being drawn. So lovely as that is, most of us aren't artists, so we need to have a quick fire way of drawing that, and that is the stick figure, where the cell body is represented by a dot, the axons align, and then we fork it at the end to show where the axon terminal is. So this is at the bottom, this is two neurons, and in the box is the synapse. So the synapse includes the axon terminal of the presynaptic neuron and the cell body of the postsynaptic neuron, and the social distancing space between the two of them. So hopefully on the previous picture, you got an idea that there are a lot of synapses. And in fact, there's more synapses in our body than there are stars in the Milky Way, as in trillions of them. So when we look at synapses, that we have two different categories. Can you kind of see the differences between these pictures? Okay, so hopefully what you got was different structures. because they didn't look the same. And so if we're going to have different structures, we're also going to have different locations. So the one on the left, which is boxier looking, this is an example of an electrical synapse. Okay? Whereas the one on the right is an example of a chemical synapse. So let's talk first about the electrical synapses. So previously, when we were talking about intracellular connections, we learned that one of the three types of intracellular connections was a gap junction, okay, where you had like a tubular structure going through plasma membranes of two adjacent cells so things could pass almost instantly between the two of them. So that's exactly what an electrical synapse looks like. It corresponds to a gap junction. And it's going to allow whatever current is happening in one cell, which is going to be dealing with electrical charges, those charges are going to pass immediately to the adjacent cell. And so we're going to have the same response over here. And even though the arrows are showing it in one direction, I want you to realize it's bidirectional. It can go either direction, depending which way the nerve impulse is traveling. So it's very simple. The response in that postsynaptic cell will always be exactly the response as the presynaptic cell. And since this is just an introductory class, we're going to say it's exactly the same. Now, if you knew physics, you'd know, okay, so there has to be a slight decrease in the amplitude. And okay, we don't care about that. We're just going to say it's exactly the same. Of the two types of synapses, this one by far is the less common. We find it only in very specific places such as cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. If you've ever seen anybody who is looking at you and then they have the little eye jerks, it happens there as well. And also in parts of our brain which are important for creating memories and where we have emotional memories occurring as well. So when we come back and we study non-skeletal muscle, we'll be talking a lot more about the electrical synapses. But for now, let's just put them on a shelf, understand what they are, but we're not going to dive into them in detail. So what that means we're going to dive into detail for are the other types, and for the which is the chemical synapse. In order to understand the chemical synapse, the first thing we have to know, I talked about the social distancing between the axon terminal of the presynaptic cell and the cell body of the postsynaptic cell. Well, that little space has a name. And that space, which is microscopic, tiny, 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 is called a synaptic cleft. Okay, so a synapse is more than just a synaptic cleft. The synapse is those two cells plus the synaptic cleft between the two cells. All right. So, looking at chemical synapses, here's what happens, okay? And I apologize for the busyness of the picture, but let me just kind of talk about it. When we have this incoming message, hits the axon terminals, goes to the terminal boutons, and that presynaptic cell, it wants to get there to the postsynaptic cell, but it can't. It can't pass directly. So what has to happen is this presynaptic cell has to release chemicals which carry the message to the postsynaptic cell. And those chemicals collectively we call neurotransmitters. And there's multiple kinds of neurotransmitters, and we'll talk about some of them in some great detail, and I'll also just explain a few of them to you. Okay. And so based on this message that the neurotransmitter carries to the postsynaptic cell, and I know we always draw the cell body, but it could be going to the dendrites. We just, you know, in our stick figure drawings, only draw cell bodies. There's going to be a new message, so we're going to have a new nerve impulse, whether it's excitatory or inhibitory. We're going to have something happen in that postsynaptic cell. So, looking at the neurotransmitters, where are they? How can you tell what they are? So this is a close-up of an axon terminal and terminal bouton. So here it is on the far right. There's the axon terminal coming, and then here's the terminal bouton swelling at the end. And what you notice in it, whoops, my pictures are all getting ahead of me, is we have this big orange mitochondria. Why do we have mitochondria? Yeah, the ATP. So what's going to happen is going to require a bunch of ATP. So that's why we have mitochondria there. And what happens are all these little green structures. These are synaptic vesicles, which are sitting here. They were made up in the cell body. They travel down the axon and down in the axon terminal, and they sit in the terminal bouton, and they're waiting for something to happen, which we'll learn about shortly. They're filled with those neurotransmitter chemicals. When it gets the correct message, what's going to happen is those synaptic vesicles will undergo exocytosis, as is shown in the part of the picture I'm highlighting right now, and they're going to release their neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. Now that process of exocytosis, just like exocytosis everywhere, requires energy, and that's why we have mitochondria sitting there. And then I spent a while trying to find an electron microscope picture that looks something like this, and I think I did a pretty good job over here. And so the pink are the synaptic vesicles. This big red thing here is representing a mitochondria. All right. And so that's it for this part. And in the next section, we are going to put a chemical synapse to work. So thank you for this one. This one I don't think was stressful, but just remember after the next one, if you're stressed, come back and stare at that puppy dog picture again. It'll make you feel a lot better. And that will help you create memories, as you'll learn later on in this course.